Hello, I'm Karen Perry, manager of the library's Just for the Health of Initiative, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's program, A Breakthrough Every Week, Cancer Research in Our Community. Sponsored by Astera Cancer Care and the East Brunswick Public Library's Just for the Health Bit Initiative. I'm honored to have tonight's distinguished presenter, Dr. James Salwitz of Astera Cancer Care. Dr. Salwitz is a medical oncologist who specializes in medical oncology, hospice, and palliative care. He attended the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, Rutgers Medical School, and completed his residency at the McGraw Medical Center of Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. Dr. Salwitz has conducted numerous fellowships, including at the National Cancer Institute and the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. He's received many honors, including an article in New Jersey's Top Doctors in New Jersey Monthly Magazine, Inside Jersey Magazine with an article titled New Jersey's Top Doctors Meet the First-Rate Physicians Who Lead Us to Wellness in 2021, and the publication Castle Connolly Top Doctors for the New York metro area. On a personal note, I'm very grateful to Dr. Salwitz, who has been a long-time library advocate and supporter, who really appreciates the importance of health literacy and how an informed and educated patient can advocate for themselves, make informed choices, and have the best health outcomes. And now, without any further delay, I am so honored to have tonight's distinguished speaker, Dr. James Salwitz. Welcome, Dr. Salwitz.
Aaron, thank you so much. And thanks so much for doing this. I mean, the library is such a dominant and important part of our community. You know, it's one of the things that connects us and pulls us together. So anytime we have a chance to support, as well as to reach out on an important topic like cancer research, we're thrilled to be involved. So thank you so much for doing this. We really, really appreciate it. So thank you all for joining us this evening. We're going to talk tonight about cancer research and the importance thereof to you individually and to all of us. So I joined the NIH back in the 1980s. And at that time, we had about a dozen cancer drugs for treatment. We had nothing for nausea. So cancer treatment was really challenging and difficult. And tragically, at that time, more than 70% of our patients died of the disease. Now, some 35 years later in practice, I live in the exact opposite sort of world. Our cure rates, are phenomenally higher. Our patients, even who are not cured, are living for years and years, full lives. Cancer for some great amount of our patients, even when it can't be cured, has become a chronic disease like diabetes or high blood pressure, thing for which we have great treatments. People aren't really sick with treatment. Most treatment is not done in the hospital. Many of our therapies are pills or immunotherapies or genetic therapies. It is an incredibly different world. Hundreds and hundreds of new treatments, observations, understandings of the technology are happening every year. Last year, there were some 46,000 articles published in cancer research. And it's all about, starts at the bench, doing research, doing the science to figure out how, we get through this. In our society right now, there are a lot of things to be frustrated about, scared about, nervous about. It seems as if the world is going in the wrong direction. There are some incredible successes also, and this is one of them. The explosion of science, the explosion of our ability to treat not only cancer, but a broad range of medical conditions, all of which are important for research clinical trials, is just astonishing. And it's an opportunity to talk to all of you about that tonight, is really, is really, a pleasure. So that is what we're going to do this evening. So what I wanted you to understand this evening is what are clinical trials, how you get connected, why you should be connected, going forward. But, this place to start, I think, of that is what exactly is a clinical trial. A clinical trial is legally by federal law and also by practice, the process for which we investigate drugs and treatments of all types before they get, before they get approved. And this is not only drugs and immunotherapy genetics and stuff, it's hip prostheses, it's any sort of an implant, it's radiological process. At some point, it's going through a clinical trial in order to get approval. But it's generally the core of a trial is that it takes a known treatment that we think is standard of care, the best, and we compare it to something that might improve upon that and might be better. That's an important concept, that we're building on the past, we're building on the giants of before, of these observations before. And that's each trial tries to do better than the one before. No one's going back to base and stuff and so starting over again, just saying, well, let's see if this works. You're starting with the things that are that are at the core, and that's very important. We do trials for a number of different reasons. We do them in order to better diagnose cancer. We do it in order to reduce the risk of cancers coming back. We do it to improve the treatments we have for cancer. We do it to make cancer therapy easier, less nausea, less chance of being hospitalized, less complications, less long-term problems. We do them to help prevent cancers. Observations about cigarettes or additives, et cetera. At some point were done, some sort of research was done in order to make those observations. We do it just to help all of us live better and, better quality of life. Cancer continues to be an extraordinarily common illness. There are some cancers have decreased in rate, breast cancer, lung cancer, we have less of them, but they've to some extent been replaced by other cancers. Liver cancer, some types of esophageal cancer are up. So cancer is still something that, almost over 2 out of 3, almost 1 in 3 people, will get, and therefore we all will know someone, that has cancer. But cancer research has been highly successful. Now people live for years, with cancer, even if they can't be cured, and our cure rates are substantially higher. The mortality rate, the death rate of cancer in this country has dropped, and this is because of cancer research. And people just live better with these illnesses because the treatments work and because the treatments are less likely to cause long-term toxicity. It makes a really tremendous difference. We're able to get treatments via research to patients faster because therefore, if we can get people to trials and on studies earlier, therefore we're finding out more rapidly about those therapies. In addition to which we get those individual patients, the therapies. More and more, our research is focusing on the quality of life, trying to make therapies easier and help people live better with therapy and then after therapy. So, earlier major therapies where you had a lot of toxicity at the time of treatment and afterwards, so we're seeing, less and less. But every new treatment that comes along, every therapy you're getting, which is the standard therapy now, at some point went through a clinical trial. So, why should you consider, getting involved, in a clinical trial? So we should probably start with the official word. So the NCCN, the National Cooperative Cancer Network, is the network of all the NIH cancer centers around the United States, and this is like the official body that collects cancer research and puts forward the opinions on how cancer should be treated. And one of their main lines, anything you see from them, and it's really important, is that patients should consider being involved, in clinical trials. Pharmaceutical companies can only start bringing a therapy forward for routine use if it's been through a clinical trial. And on the other hand, they can also only bring a drug forward for a clinical trial if it already has a lot of research to support it going forward. We'll discuss how we get there in a minute. Research trials are very intensely monitored. If you're on a research trial, one of the challenges is how carefully you are watched while you're on that study. They have to be done in a very specific, exact way. So at the end of the trial, so people can say clearly, this worked, this didn't work, it worked in this kind of patient, and they're not confused by, well, maybe this worked, but a lot of these people had other medical problems. In addition to which, anyone on the trial is very carefully watched with it's the best possible way to get treatment as far as monitoring and care and making sure that there's no deviation and that every slight change that happens is carefully monitored by both the doctors giving the therapy, by the pharmaceutical company, by the FDA. I mean, trials have gone through this complicated structural process in order to be monitored carefully. So as a way to get the safest, best monitored therapy, it's the best way. I think it's important to note the following, what's noted in this slide. A patient on a clinical trial, any therapy associated with that trial is paid for by the pharmaceutical company. And that includes if there are extra tests that need to be done, as well as the treatment itself. And that means that for many patients, this is a highly cost-effective therapy. I mean, no doctor, no patient would say, well, I'm going to do this trial only because it's paid for. But on the other hand, a concern is addressed that, well, you're going to doing a little extra testing, or they're watching me more often. Who pays for that? Well, the answer is that the pharmaceutical company, pays for that. But despite all these really good reasons to get a trial, only 4% of cancer patients ever participate in trial. I mean, and that's kind of a depressing number. You consider how important this body of information. The vast majority of patients that might benefit from going in a trial probably never even consider it. It's just not something that comes up. And we can talk about how you avoid that, but that's probably the major reasons. There are result of that is not only people don't get on trials that might have helped them, but there are some groups in this country that are particularly underrepresented in trials. Minorities, older patients, and sadly, women compared to men are less likely to end up on a trial. And there's two things wrong with that. I mean, one of the things wrong with that is that it's biased against them. I mean, there is a possible treatment that might have been cutting edge that they would have benefited from, and they simply don't get access. And the reverse is, when you do come and you turn around and publish a study, you don't have data from these individuals. So there have been therapies over the years that, they went through a whole study, and the study was done on 90% white men. They put the study out there, and lo and behold, it says unusual toxicities in the African-American population, or is not as active in women, or has unusual side effects in older people. And because those individuals were underrepresented on the study, we just, didn't know. There are a lot of myths about trials, which we'll talk about it in a second. But the key is to this, is that if people aren't on trials, then we don't learn. I think the reason to go on trial most of the time is that it may help you or your family or your friend, get slightly better therapy, possibly. I think that's still a great reason, maybe the main reason to look at trials. But the reality is that as long as only 4% of people are going on trials, then it just can take us that much longer, to get answers. So I think one thing that people think when they think about the word clinical research is that I think the word guinea pig is not far from their minds, and that's not what trials are. I mean, if you think of guinea pigs, they're just using human beings to find out what's wrong, what's right, what makes people sick, and just so we don't care about the people. Trials are heavily structured so that the patient has the best opportunity of benefiting from that. And trials are heavily structured to pull people out or make immediate modifications if there is something guinea pig-like about it, which is the sense if there's unusual toxicities or surprises or not lack of benefit. Trials themselves can be terminated early, a patient can be pulled out, modifications are built into the trials. So, I mean, this is, really a complete fallacy. It is not the goal of trials at all. Some people don't participate because trials are too far away, for them. And I think that is unfortunately probably true in some parts of the country. That's not true in New Jersey. In New Jersey, in your community, there are practices that participate in clinical trials. I'm seeing in East Brunswick, and our offices are 2 miles from my house, and we have dozens of clinical trials right here. But that's true throughout New Jersey. And in the 1980s, when I was in the NIH, people had to fly across the country to get into studies at the NIH. But that's not true. There are NIH-sponsored studies in East Brunswick now, or in New Brunswick, or throughout the state. So this is not a reason, anymore. This is something local, personal. You can get the same quality medical care locally, and also look at the possibility of participating in a clinical trial, which can be a benefit to you. Along the same thing, individuals, don't want to change doctors. And this is actually probably can be a real concern, if your particular doctor doesn't have a clinical trial. But oncologists, but also every specialty, because we're talking about cancer tonight, but the same words we talked about in infectious disease or cardiology or orthopedic surgery, all of who do research. And they're doctors. We know this. We know that this is the future. This is how we have to connect. So if a patient comes to me and says, I want to be involved in a trial, and I have this particular tumor, and we don't happen to have a local trial, but we can find one for you. That's our job, to help you reach out and make those connections. And that's the world we're in. This is about us. This is about the patient. This, in this case, is about all patients and research, and we want to make those connections. So yeah, it's sometimes necessary to change physicians, although a lot of physicians will collaborate. We've sent people someplace else, they've had a trial, and then they've come back, or we've done part in the other part trials and elsewhere. So there are ways around this, and you can stay connected most of the time to clinician. A lot of time, your own physician has access to a trial, but it's not a reason to just say, well, I love my physician, and that's wonderful, but so I won't do this. It's at least something that needs to be discussed, and explored. There's, this is real close to the guinea pig issue, but a tiny bit difference, and that's the placebo. That is, that I'm going on a study, and in one hand, they're going to give me the life-saving critical new drug, and the other is a sugar pill. That's not how research is done. And one of the first, things I mentioned is that we're building on the past. So if we're seeing a patient that has a particular disease, a cancer, and we have a therapy for that, and we have a therapy for almost all cancers at this point. It's so different than when I started all this, therapy. But we think there may be a study that might offer something better. What you're doing is you're comparing this treatment, which works, to a treatment that might be slightly better, but there's nothing to support that it is worse. And a lot of times it'll be this treatment that's good, and then it'll just be added on top of it. But at no point is, if there is any sort of a therapeutic opportunity, is someone saying, here's a sugar pill in my right hand and you won't know, and the other hand is the maybe treatment that might help you. That's not how research is done. And that's certainly not the goal, to do that to any patient. So that's not what's happening. In addition to which, you're very clearly told what the different therapies are. Are you going to have a choice between them? How it's decided before you make any sort of decision, going forward. The medical profession has had to get over some early bad decisions and bad actions around research. And that's just something we have to do, we have to get beyond. It's not true at all, even a little bit anymore. But if you look at research in medicine in the 20s, 30s, 40s, even into as late as the 1980s, there was reasons, particularly for minority populations, not to trust in research because there wasn't a lot of honesty. And the research wasn't explained carefully to the individuals being involved. A lot of times they weren't even told they were on research studies, and the different treatments weren't explained carefully. And there's some classic studies where people were basically ignored while they were doing research on them. We've moved fantastically beyond that, but this is still something that the medical profession, has to share the guilt for that history and get beyond. And that's why evenings like this are so important to understand that that's just not the way research is done anymore. The transparency, which we'll talk about in a minute, is incredibly core to the research and research problems. This is probably in the end, why don't we ever get people on research? Because nobody talks about it. Now, I have a oncologist in practice, and I have a good understanding of what standard medical practice is for multiple, different diseases, and I have access to the different research through a lot of different databases. It is, frankly, reflexively a little easier for me to say, you've got disease A, we use treatment 1. You disease B, we use treatment 2, and just kind of move forward with that. That is a reflexive process for the physician, particularly if there are good therapies available, or they work very well. And so physicians, frankly, can be a little reflexive and just kind of moving forward with therapies, particularly if there's standard excellent therapies already there, and not saying, okay, there's standard excellent therapies, but is there any sort of research trial that we should be thinking about at this moment? And that is why we'd hope in our practice that research would be always on our minds. But to just show that it's apparently not, there's a little icon in the upper left corner of every one of our computer screens that pops up if our research team identifies that one of the patients I'm seeing might be a research candidate, to remind me the person might be a research candidate. But in the end, an evening like this is so important because we're saying to you, at least ask. I mean, the worst thing that happened is someone say, the therapy you're getting is so excellent that there's not a role for research trial at this time. And that wouldn't be a bad thing to hear. But on the other hand, the opportunity to explore it, is incredibly important. So how do research study work? How do as a drug treatment, prostheses, test get to through a research process? And this I think is a wonderful slide because it gives you a feeling of time. So if you're starting on the left side of the screen here, it's a lead discovery. This is the observation that something may be of benefit. A drug is found, a gene is found, an immune target is found, and a therapy which might start to treat this is found. And that says 5 to 6 years. Frankly, you could reverse those two, and it could be the 8 to 10 years. There's a lot of time, but the time someone makes the first observation that something might be used as treatment or a drug might be used as treatment, going forward. And there's a gigantic period of time before that occurs. And it's only after that long at the bench primary research, chemists talking to immunotherapists, talking to cell biologists, in labs, people, that we never see and hear for, except in research, trials, publications, that they come up with an idea. And then that goes to, when they have their preclinical testing, and which is preclinical testing, you can read that as mice, or some other test tube way of treating, see something might actually be of benefit. And it's only after you go through that you start going through the phases of clinical trial in human beings, where you see phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, way on the right, phase 4. That's when you're actually starting to use this in human beings. This is a long, incredible period of time with, tens of thousands of hours and frankly, millions or hundreds of millions of dollars put into this process before it ever gets over the right that it becomes an approved drug. And where you say National Drug Application Approval, NDA approval, that's the moment when someone says this drug is now available, for general use at that moment. It is a gigantic period of time, and we'll walk through this a little more. But I would like to make an interesting side observation about research and what can be done in an emergency. Think of the COVID vaccines and look at this. COVID vaccines, the regular vaccines, flu vaccines, other vaccines have gone through this process. We went through this process with a COVID vaccine in 11 months, right? The time we first identified the virus and the genome was sequenced in January of 2020 to the time of the first vaccines, 11 months. Now, how is that possible? Well, that whole lead discovery preclinical testing thing had already pretty much been worked out around Ebola. And that's where the structural concepts, so you already have that loading period. So they had the structure concept for the vaccine by March, but it's still astonishing how fast we got through that process. And when I think of the victory, a part of the COVID pandemic, it was that we as a society and scientists, came together to make this happen that quickly, and therefore, it really changed the world. So another way to look at that same slide. So what's a phase 1 trial? A phase 1 trial is the first time that they give a drug to human beings. A phase 1 trial means they've already given it to mice, they've already given it to pigs. Now we don't use monkeys much anymore. We use pigs because they're like human beings, no pun intended. This is the first time you give it to people. And the real idea of a phase 1 trial is to see how safe it is in human beings and what the side effects are. Most of the side effects have already been modeled out, in animals, and biologically understand how these different drugs work, but they want to find out how it works humans. And frankly, you want to find out what the dose is. How much of the drug is used in people. Phase 1 trials are small. It's only a very small group of people, maybe as little as 24, 36 people. And in each level, you're maybe changing the dose, but you understand what are the side effects, et cetera, of it. Now, phase 1 trials are technically not designed to see how well a drug works against a disease. However, every successful therapy has gone through a phase 1 trial. And as we get better and better at this, it's funny, if you look at the history of this, the chance of a phase 1 trial working gets more and more, because we understand more and more how these therapies work. When we really get phase 1 trial back in the 1980s, we might go through 20 drugs before we found any benefit. Now it is, it's almost more common for a phase 1 drug. It is more to be beneficial in some way, than not. But the goal of phase 1 trials is toxicity. Now, if the drug works, people can stay on the drug, et cetera. But the goal is to find out exactly how to give it to human beings, and do they tolerate it, and what are the doses. There's a lot of monitoring in phase 1 trials. Phase 2 trials are the next step. So you've gone through phase 1, you find out how much drug to give people, and you start to get a feeling, because they do watch what happens with different diseases. And then you start the phase 1 trial, you get a feeling of what it might work on. So you start giving it a phase 2 trial, you start to give it, and generally a phase 2 trial is given to a specific disease. We think this will work on lung cancer. We think this will work on breast cancer. If you're talking about, heart disease, we think this will work, in breaking atherosclerosis, talking about seizure disorders. We think it'll work on this kind of seizure, et cetera. And you're applying those drugs to that. And this is the first time you're starting to get a feeling of the, whether or not it is actually beneficial in human beings. But you've got the preclinical work, which actually has looked at some of this question, and you've got the phase 1 work. So there's a pretty good chance you're going to find some benefit in this. Now, phase 2 uses a little, it has more patients. It is a longer, a phase 1 can be completed sometimes in months. A phase 2 usually takes a year or two. And it's basically looking at one disease at a time. But if it's, and you're starting to get a feeling is it better than standard, of care? So you might have someone, for example, the cancer that's come back, it's after some standard therapy, and you have a new existing standard of care, that standard of care that would be used, but you think maybe the phase 2 drug might be better, and the two might be compared. And then a lot of those times, those therapies will have crossover arms. So if one stopped working, you can cross over the other and see. A phase 3 trial is you've learned from the phase 2 trial how does, which disease it works in. You have more understanding about side effects and toxicity. You've gotten even more information. And now you really start to use it in large numbers of patients in more complicated situations, and often earlier in a disease. So for example, if in the phase 1 trial, you had a hint that it worked in lung cancer. In phase 2 trial, you tried it in lung cancer and you found that it worked, but everybody using it, you only gave it to people that had fairly advanced lung cancer, because you're using standard of therapy earlier. Now in a phase 3, you say, gosh, that seemed to work really well in phase 2. Let's start using it earlier in lung cancer, maybe as compared to a standard therapy in the initial, or matched with mixed with a standard therapy in the initial. We're seeing that a lot now with immunotherapies, which are being added to other disease therapies early on. So if we have a treatment for bladder cancer, or for pancreatic cancer, or lung cancer, we're adding immunotherapies to them simultaneously. And so that's how you get the experience early on with those therapies. These therapies are usually randomized. And by which I mean that when a person signs up for the trial, they agree that they're either going to get the standard therapy or the standard therapy plus the new treatment, or the standard therapy versus the new treatment. And that's the decision that's it's randomized. The patient doesn't get to pick, but the patient decides before they go on the trial. They'll know what the choice would be. But there's no trial on, like I said, that is placebo-like. No one is deliberately saying, this is the standard therapy over here. This is not very good of therapy, et cetera, I guess. And this new therapy, let's try the therapy versus the standard versus the other. No one's doing that. We're constantly trying to improve. And these are very carefully watched, very carefully monitored. And this is where you start getting a lot of, various monitoring and tests, so that we spot early benefits or early failure. So when someone is on these kind of trials, they watch extraordinarily closely, and it's for drugs, it's for immunotherapy, it's for genetic therapies, it's for way of even monitoring those, the tests that we use, to watch these therapies work. Phase 4 trials means, so at the completion of phase 3 trial, you have enough information that the drug company and the FDA will make a decision. The FDA decides, the drug company applies, whether or not this drug is going to be approved for general use. And it'll be approved by the FDA for the specific things that are approved from in the phase 3. And so if it was proven for breast cancer, it'll be approved for breast or whatever the disease is. Once it's approved, it's in general use. And then physicians can generally use it, for the what's approved for, and they can use often for other therapies, the other diseases that may have a similarity or a balance depending on insurance coverage and FDA approval. Phase 4 trials are after it's already been in wide use, and now you're using it in large, complicated settings, like long-term monitoring studies, et cetera, where you might use a drug. Or do we use this drug for a year? Do we use this drug for 2 years? Do we use this drug before another therapy or after the therapy? Do we use it? What are the long-term side effects of this drug? How long do we have to give this drug? Can we stop the drug after 5 years? Can we stop the drug after 10 years? I mean, every drug is being monitored, and every therapy for a long period of time, and new studies are being done. And the drug company may go back now and say, gosh, we got this approved for lung cancer, but we think it might work for pancreatic. And they'll do a pancreatic study, which technically is a phase 3, but because it's being tried in that same model, but because it's already past approval, a lot of people will call that a phase 4, because it's an approved drug being used for new indication. In clinical trials, there's a number of things that are being watched, being watched during the study. Now, the most critical things, and I think all of us, would like, clinical trials, is just to help people live longer. What it's referred to as overall survival. And that is either live longer because they're cured, or they live longer because it controls the disease for a longer period of time. But people also measure other things. They measure what's known as progression-free survival, which is how long on that therapy it occurs before the disease starts to grow again. And this is an earlier marker. Most of the time, that's also a marker for eventually for overall survival. But since overall survival, it can maybe be years afterwards, it's progression survival, something, an indication you can pick up earlier. So, people watch that. People watch what's called disease-free survival. So if you have a therapy which puts people into remission, it's like, say, a bone marrow transplant, or CAR T therapy, how long does it last before, the cancer recurs? If it recurs at all, disease-free survival could be the rest of someone's life, but that's, monitoring disease-free survival. And then, of course, the how often does a particular therapy put someone into complete remission? Which is unmeasurable disease, which is a good surrogate, again, for overall survival. It's good surrogate for all these, but all these things, are watched. But you're also watching for side effects. You're also interested for biological changes. We want to know, does a particular therapy, possibly cause liver problems in the future? Does a particular therapy cause depression? Does a particular therapy result in immunological changes or genetic changes, et cetera? There's a lot of monitoring that goes on. Patients on clinical trials saying, say, boy, you're drawing a lot of blood from me. And sometimes it does seem to be a lot of blood, but a lot of it has to do with this kind of monitoring, so that 2 years from now, someone says, we think we saw this change we're seeing now because of this therapy. Do we have any samples from 2 years ago when it's studied? Well, yes, we do. Find those people. Maybe that change that occurred isn't important going forward. So there's a tremendous amount of work and thought, that is used to monitor patients so that we learn every single piece of information we can going forward. So, I started with saying this, and I'll cycle, back to this. And if every person should at least at some point be saying to themselves and saying to their clinician, is there a role for a clinical trial? It's like saying, what are the side effects going to be? What's my prognosis? What's my diagnosis? I'm in a clinical trial. It's important, the question, to ask. People that get involved in a clinical trial go through an informed consent process, and this is an incredibly detailed process about what you think is and what you understand is about to happen. You get everything in writing. You get to sit down with a clinical trial educator, as well as the lead physician or a physician on the clinical trial team. And they walk you through every little piece about this trial. There are no surprises. We want you to be able to make a decision. And this is before you decide about going on the trial. This is before you get to sit down and go ask any question, meet with them again and again if you want. It's, if you're not sure. And at any time in this process, you can say, okay, I understand. I appreciate the importance of this, but I don't want to do this. That's fine. So, and there's two reasons that, that's important. And we want you to know you can walk away. One, that's just fair, right? You want to go what you're getting involved in. This is important. This is your life. This is your health. This is your family, your loved ones' health, etc. So we want you to know everything that's about to happen. We do not want you to be surprised. We want you to, to be committed to this, which is the second part, is that once you're on the trial, you're on the trial. Now, that doesn't mean once you sign the dotted line, which you literally do, that doesn't mean you can't walk away. You can walk away. I mean, you always have the chance to walk on trial. But as far as the trial is concerned, you're still on the trial. So if you look at any publication of any trial, somewhere there'll be a list of the number of people that dropped out, and they still count. So if I have a patient that says they want to be in a lung cancer trial, and we go through the process, and they go through informed consent, and they sign, and one day later they say, oh, I changed my mind, they're on the trial. Now, they may never get a test or a treatment, etc. They won't, obviously, if they refuse. They have an absolute right to refuse at any time, but they're still monitored. So that, obviously dilutes out the trial. And, so we want people to understand everything they're getting involved in, because that's important for they have a right. And also because therefore they're committed to the trial as we are, going forward. So the finding a trial, there's different ways to find a trial, but the best way at some point is to talk to your doctor, your treatment team. Talk to them and say, are there any studies that are, that's available, et cetera. And sometimes there's a lot happening when you have a diagnosis like this, and one of the most unfair things in the world is that when you're scared and you don't feel well and things are changing fast, you have to make complex decisions. That's the cancer journey. It's one of the worst things about it. So, it's still worth at this moment in time to reach out, and people should be taking the time to answer your questions and listening to you about this. There are a number of ways you can do your own research. The reason that we have said be careful here is that, it's important you understand your disease that you're doing research in, and it's also making sure that people that are really offering trials, are really doing studies and not just selling, something. There's a lot of online resources. By far, the best one is clinicaltrials.gov. This is the NIH's website. It is fabulous. It is written in doctor as well as in layperson. There's no hidden part of it. And you can learn everything about every study, et cetera, that's out there as well. And you can search by disease, treatment, geography, doctor. I mean, there's an incredible amount of information there. Good way to get educated about your disease, no matter what. There are obviously your doctor is critical. Pharmaceutical companies also reach out. it's I'm still not convinced that this TV ads work, about, but various therapies and stuff out there, but pharmaceutical companies do, reach out as far as, therapies that are involved. They still have to do the same standards. You're still going through a research whole structure. The same structure does not change. The more, of course, I mean, this is just a good side, line for just I would say for any patient. I mean, as much as you can know about your disease, the better you'll be. What kind of cancer you have, where the cancer is, where the cancer isn't, the genetics of the cancer, if that's, at least at a basic level. Genetics in cancer is incredibly complicated and overwhelming. So we're not asking, you to understand, everything about that, but there is some genetic information about certain cancers that can be extraordinarily helpful. And your doctors know this. This is something that's basic, for oncologists at this point, is the genetics, of your cancer. My point below about complicated language, this is what your doctor, this is what the research people you're involved in should be translating for you. You should not, have to speak, a medical school student to understand this. In the end, this is just language, and we should be communicating with you clearly about, about what is, what's happening. So, getting back to the basic trial, the core reason you should consider going on a research trial is the possibility of the newest, most innovative therapies. So at Astera, I mentioned, we have dozens and dozens of trials that we participate in. And the reason is we think this is a really exciting way to get our patients possibly the next best therapy. Obviously we know the, the best standard therapy, but there are treatments out there that are not quite approved yet. That are not quite clear about how they're going to be used, that we can get our patients involved in. And that's a really exciting idea, for our patients. And we have seen some remarkable things over the years, in research studies that we participated in, and have been involved in publishing, that, the therapies that we thought we had the best therapy, but we added something to that came out of, a research tool, et cetera. And, we were like, wow, this is really fantastic that we were able to, to add this, et cetera. Is that a guarantee? Of course not. But it's a possibility. It's a piece of, it's a way of coping and a way of hoping, for things that are better, and as we push forward. The care in a research trial is as good or better than standard care, only because the research studies are so specific and so exact, and there's so many people watching every single patient. Now, it's all protected under HIPAA. People aren't reading about you in Washington, but they're watching you. Do they get this blood test back? Does this X-ray done? Are we certain this X-ray shows what it shows, et cetera? I mean, your CAT scans are reread by study people, et cetera. So it's really superb care. It's an altruistic comment. But this is a disease, that still, affects, millions of people, and, this is a chance for us all to work together to make the future better, as people in the last 30, 40 years have done, for us, already. And it's a chance, therefore, to help build that future, to be involved, in a certain way, have a little bit, interesting way, a little more control, over, what's happening to us, as well as, what follows, in the future. So, I suggest basically, talk to your doctor, don't hesitate, to bring it up, take a little time to talk about trials. I have the second opinion comment in here. Patients all the time say to me, well, do you mind if I get a second opinion? And my standard answer to that, which, is pretty basic, is say, the worst that happens is we learn something, right? So, and if someone says to me, I'd like to get a second opinion, I will help them in doing that in any way I can. Make sure they get the information that they can. And if there's someone else somewhere doing a research study that we don't have access to, we will help them get access to that, if that seems to be the appropriate thing. The future of research is really cool, because when you think about it, there's still, we're still doing research on individual patients, one at a time. The future, is a lot of new development in how we do research. One is that more and more we'll be doing research earlier and earlier, on patients. For example, the gold standard or dream of all cancer patients, all cancer doctors, is having a blood test to detect cancers years before you can get it. And I don't mean a PSA for prostate. I mean a blood test that picks up cancer cells. What we're talking about, which is now what we're talking about, is that sort of called liquid biopsy, is the term people are using for that dream. And we're not far from it. And, so when we get to the point that you can do a blood test on me and tell me that 3 years from now that I'm going to develop colon cancer, my colonoscopy is normal, then we think about treating me, early on, et cetera. So research is going to move back into that area, treating earlier and earlier, as soon as we detect earlier and earlier. More and more, we're going to be using computer modeling. We're already using a ton of computer modeling to build toxicities, and prevent, and prevent side effects, et cetera. But more and more, we'll be building, artificial computer people, if you will, and then throwing artificial computer drugs in and running tests on the computer person before they ever know a human being. We're going to see more, more and more. We're already seeing more and more involvement, in patients and patient advocates, in research. So, saying what they want and what they want, to look at. So, we may be thinking, we really want, to be looking at this next best thing for this particular cancer, care, but this person saying, yeah, maybe, but what patients really want is to feel better in this way or have less side effect in this way, or to detect this earlier. And more we're listening. So, that's a change. So the future we're headed into as far as research is just getting more and more excellent, more and more focused, more and more specific, and more cures. This continues to be an area that is just exploding. We will continue to see more therapies develop, faster therapies developed. And will we cure, cancer piece by piece over time? We're gradually whittling it away. And more, we're learning about this. So it's a very exciting, future that's ahead of us. And at its core, our clinical trials. So thank you so much, for, so allowing me, to speak with you today. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
All right. Well, listen, I'm going to wrap it up here. I'd like to thank Dr. Salwitz. This has been such an interesting and helpful session, and it has given so much hope to me, and I'm sure to all of our viewers here this evening. So thank you so much. And I see that you have some really nice comments. Dr. Salwitz, people are saying thank you for this informative session. Thank you so much. Always love attending your sessions and great presentation. Thank you. So as usual, Dr. Salwitz, a stellar performance, so to speak. And thank you again. And thank you to all our participants. I just want to remind everyone that the program is being taped. Melissa will be sending everyone a link directly to their email, and it will be on our health portal, justforthehealthofit.org. Okay, so again, thank you, Doctor, and thank you to everyone for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you. Bye-bye now. Thank you.